You ever hear an engineer say, this track needs less 300 hertz, or boost some 10K, or we need to cut around 3.2 kilohertz, without looking at an EQ? It kind of sounds like wizardry, but it's actually a very learnable skill, and not as hard as you think. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I personally recognize and name frequencies by ear as a professional mix engineer without needing to peek at an EQ. And while I of course recommend you mix as many songs as possible to develop your ear, today we're going to be looking at the faster way to name these frequencies with some of my personal tricks. You'll be seriously shocked at how quickly you actually pick this up if you stay and watch until the end of the video. That's exactly what happened to my subscribers the last time I did a video like this. So are you ready to unlock this superpower too? Good, because friend, your ears are better than you think. Let's dive in. So you might know that humans can hear a frequency range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Now, within that frequency range is all sort of sections like low end, bass, mids, highs, etc. Now, how do we actually pinpoint which those frequencies are? I like to use a technique that I've kind of stumbled upon myself called frequency association, or at least that's what I've been calling it. Because what I'm going to do is take these frequency ranges and compare them to all sorts of kind of regular everyday sounds that I can relate them to. And just like that, in an instant, I can pick out where these frequencies sit and memorize the actual frequency names of those sections. Now, not even just sections, but in some of the mid-frequency ranges, I can actually get super close to almost calling out an exact frequency by name. So let's show you how we're going to do this. We'll start in the low end, and here's a song called That's Not What I Wanted by Luke Prov. Have a listen. Okay. We're going to look at this low section here. Specifically, we're going to look at 20 hertz down here to around 85 hertz. And this is going to be where we describe it as kind of the sub-thump area. This is where you're going to feel the sound more than actually hear any clarity in it. So listen to that now. Now, if you're not listening on a pair of headphones or monitors, that's going to be hard to hear. So make sure you're listening in a good environment for this video. That low end area there is the thump of the kick drum. It's some of the meat of the bass guitar. It's that low rumble. And the way I like to pinpoint this spot from around 20 hertz to 85 hertz is with a thunderstorm sound. And after you learn about this sub frequency section, I'm going to show you a way to distinguish bass from subs. It's really cool. So you'll see that in a moment. But listen to this thunderstorm down here. Specifically, listen to the low rumble. The low rumble, the part that you feel, is around 20 hertz to 85-ish hertz. All of these frequencies are going to kind of overlap. But as soon as I hear bass that has this low rumble that I can literally feel, I can call out right away that it's going to be on average kind of in that 40, 50 hertz area if it's got that rumbling kind of earthquake feel. Now, that is a little bit different than some of our other bass frequencies, our low-end frequencies, which are roughly between 85 to 200 hertz. I'm going to show you how to call these out by name. Now, there's a big difference between this section of bass and the next section, which gets a little more muddy. You need to know the difference. So I'll show you that in a moment. So let's have a listen here to around 85 to 200. Okay, so right in here, this is where we're going to have the meat of the bass guitar. We're also going to have some of the lower vocal frequencies if we're dealing with a male baritone vocalist. We're also going to have that thump of the snare. Not really the thump of the kick, but the thump of the snare drum is typically going to be in this area. So that's an association that I will make. I will just think of the snare and the thump of the snare. And the other thing that I will think of in this area is if it sounds bassy and it has bass, it's full and bassy and low, but it's not rumbling the room. It's not the thump that you feel in your chest. That's how I know it's going to be around 85 to 200 hertz. So have a listen to the snare, and we're going to look not at the crack of the snare, but the thump, the meat. Now let's zoom in. The thump, the fundamental frequency of that snare, is around 150, so it's right in that 85 to 200 area that we're looking at. These are your bass frequencies that are not your sub-low end frequencies. So that's how I know it's going to be in the bass area. It's full, thick, low, but it doesn't hit you in the chest like a thunderstorm. Now let's keep moving forward. We're going to look at our low mid-range from around 200 hertz to 400 hertz. How are we going to know that something is 200 to 400 hertz? Well, I have a couple cool associations that I like to use. The first is I think of this area as an example where I will close my mouth, and as a baritone speaking voice, I will literally close my mouth and kind of go and create this muffled sound that sounds absolutely ridiculous. You can try it too. And if you don't have a baritone voice, imagine a baritone voice speaking with kind of an underwater, mouth closed, humming sound. This area is really often described as woofy or muddy sounding. So it's that like right in there. Let's listen to the track and see if we're right. So that's pretty bang on. It's that woofy, underwater, muffled, muddy sound. Lots of people get this woofy, muddy range confused with boxiness. So I'll show you boxiness in a moment. You need to know the difference. Here's another example I like to think of. This is a muffled club, kind of where you're hearing it from a distance. So there's a bit of thump down here. But let's actually just zone in on this section, the 200 to 400 we're talking about. It's like you're at a high school dance, but you went to the washroom, minus the thump of the kick drum. It's that muddy, distant kind of frequency range right there. That's how I know it's 200 to 400 hertz. Now, if we go to the higher end of those frequencies, around 300 to 400 hertz, this is where it starts to sound really boxy. You might have heard that term in mixing, boxiness. And for me, when I think of boxy, I will literally think of a cardboard box being hit with a stick. So let me show you that now. This is a recording of me hitting a cardboard box with a stick. That's that boxy sound. That is right around 400. Now, this boxiness is right on the edge of the next frequency range that's really important to know. So just know that the boxiness sits on the edge. These are those frequencies that you might want to pull out of your tom drums or maybe even your kick drum if they're sounding a little bit too boxy. So here's that cardboard recording. And zooming in on where the bulk of that sound is really happening. So if it's got that kind of cardboard box type of resonance, I know it's roughly going to be in 300 to 400 hertz, and I can call that out loud. Pretty cool, right? It's almost as cool as this next section, which I describe as honkiness. This is around 500 to 900 hertz roughly. Again, the frequencies all kind of overlap, but in this zone, you're going to hear it as kind of a honking sound. Now, some people get this honkiness range confused with like a telephone filter, and that's actually not what it is. It's very different. So I'm going to show you that in a second so that you understand the difference. So a couple of ways I like to think of this honky section is with a car horn. Let's have a listen. Now that's pretty honky sound. And we're not listening to the buzziness up top. We're listening for the meat of each associative example. So when you ask yourself, where's the meat, meaning in my terms, the lowest fundamental frequencies in that example. In the thunderstorm, the meat is around 20 to 85 hertz. In the car horn, we're not looking at the buzziness. We're looking at the meat, which is happening here around, just like we said, 500 to 900 hertz. Let's have a listen. That's where the meat of this sound is happening. There's around 500, and again, it's overlapping, it's getting a bit higher. But this is that honking. These are these honking frequencies. And you're even starting to hear a little bit of a whistle there that I'm going to talk about in a sec. That's going to be really cool and game-changing for you. But another quick example is like a French horn as well. Now, a French horn can play lower notes going into the lower frequencies, can play pretty high too, but a lot of that comfortable honky range of the French horn is going to be in that zone again, between 500 to 1K. So those are some ways I like to think of honkiness. You could also think of like a goose honking. The lowest kind of goose honks are going to be in that zone too, okay? So honkiness, think of a car horn, think of a French horn. Now let's also listen to this section in the tracks to see if we can pick it out as that honking territory. So when I zoom in on it, you can really hear how honky that is. Those are those frequencies. Now let's move on to the telephone range. I call this telephone range the area from around 1K to about 2K. So now we're going to be moving up here, and you'll hear it right away. It's going to sound like a telephone filter. I'll show you this broad range first, but then I'm going to teach you how to hear and call out specific frequencies within that range. It's going to be pretty cool. Show you that in a second. It's kind of got a tiny speaker sort of sound. So that's another association you can have. It's a bit distant sounding, really mid-ranged focus, and reminiscent of like a telephone line. Or for example, let's listen to this announcement in like a grocery store. Check this out.
Attention customers, the store will be closing in 15 minutes. The store will be closing in 15 minutes.
So it's that 1 to 2K area. And this is just some like low rumble down here. This is just some like room noise up here. But most of this sound is going to come out of this area.
Attention customers, the store will be closing in 15 minutes. The store will be closing in 15 minutes.
This is that telephone frequency range right in here.
Attention customers, the store will be closing in 15 minutes. The store will be closing in 15 minutes.
So you can hear it's kind of just on the edge of that honking sound, but it's going a little higher into the mids so that we're getting a little bit of clarity, but not really. It's still kind of distant sounding. That's that telephone range. Now there's a pretty cool thing I like to do in this general range where I can personally pinpoint specific frequencies. And this is kind of a whistling technique that I just kind of naturally found myself doing. So I'm going to share it with you now because it was kind of counterintuitive, but I realized that you can actually teach this and learn it yourself and be able to literally call out pretty close to a specific frequency. So the way this works is we're going to look at this range in the song. And when you whistle, there is a natural whistle range where you're going to have your lowest whistles, where it's going to break at the bottom, and a ceiling to your highest whistles, where it's going to break at the top. You can't whistle any higher. Same as a vocalist. You have a lowest point and a high point where it breaks, right? So that's what we're actually going to do. And you're going to need to learn your whistle range, where you can comfortably whistle, and then you're going to go and find out where that whistle sound is. If we go narrow and surgical. Do you hear how when you zoom in on a frequency, it's very whistly? That's because a whistle itself, this is a recording of me whistling, the whistle itself doesn't really have much low-end information, maybe just like your throat. And it doesn't have much high information except some of the air on the top. But basically the entire sound is coming from this range in here. Check it out. Right? So most of that whistling's happening in here. We don't need the air on top. There's the bulk of the sound. And so I'm going up, and I'm going to actually zoom in and see where I can comfortably whistle up from. So my kind of comfortable middle point is around 1K. So my highest whistles are just a little above 2K. Let's go down. Okay, so I'm breaking down here around 600. Okay, so if I hear kind of a piercing whistle sound in an actual song, I can physically whistle out loud and find where that is in my whistle range. And if it's towards lower, I know it's going to be maybe below 1K, 600. What those frequencies are happening between 600 and 1K. If for me, it's a bit higher up there, I know it's going to be a little bit closer to maybe 2K. And the more that I do this, and the more that you do this and learn your own range, you're going to be able to pinpoint very close. You can hear it. You can whistle out loud. You can just get a feel for it. There's no perfect pitch needed. It's just knowing your voice. And then you're actually going to be able to hear those frequencies and say, okay, that sounds like it's around 700 because it's not my lowest whistle, but it's down there. You know what I mean? So that's been a kind of mind-blowing thing for me as a mixer, because I've always kind of done it counterintuitively to find frequencies, but I've been able to put it to words recently. So I hope this helps you. I think it's a really cool trick. And in a moment, I'll show you how to use this whistle technique too to call out even higher frequencies that you can't physically whistle. Now let's talk about the next range, going up from 2K to 4K. This is the presence range. This range is usually associated with kind of harsh, biting, or piercing sounds. This is where we can get harshness in vocal or electric guitar, like a distorted electric guitar. We're going to have some piercing frequencies here. This is the presence band where detail also starts to come out. So that's our dilemma as mixers. This is where we're getting clarity and detail. Even in like a piano, for example, you can boost this area for clarity, but if it gets too loud, it can be problematic and it can actually hurt to listen to. So there's an association technique I like for this area. This is stuff like scissors cutting paper, right? Let's have a listen to some scissors. And it's not that sparkle on top of the sound. It's like where the actual snip is happening in here. Remember, with these associations, we're not listening to the highest information in the sound. We're listening to the fundamental frequencies where the meat of the sound is. So with scissors, that's a good example. Now, if we want to narrow in on this band, usually I will hear kind of like piercing, almost bird-like whistling sounds between 3K and 4K. And this area is typically where I'm going to get those surgical EQ cuts that I have to do on a vocal, because you're going to get piercing frequencies here. And it's this higher whistle. It's not like the lower kind of baritone Alex whistle that we did the example of. This is more like a bird. So let's listen to these bird whistles and see where they lie. And then you'll know, okay, if it's something I can whistle, it's going to be lower. If it sounds like a bird whistle, it's probably in that 3 to 4K range and maybe a little bit outside. So let's listen. Right? So there's a variety of birds there, but we're kind of getting in this general area is where you'd find an average of those whistles. So if you're getting a higher piercing whistle in your song, like a bird, try looking at like 2.5K all the way up to 5K, for example. Let's check this area out in the song. How can I move forward? Now, there's an important difference between some of these piercing frequencies and some of the higher up abrasive frequencies. So make sure you stay to know the difference between those. So let's keep going up from here. We have the upper mids. This is around 4K to 8K, okay? And in this area, this is where sibilance lives. This is especially where consonants like T's and S's in vocals live. It can get harsh, but again, it can also add clarity when you add in this area. But we got to be careful, because too much of this kind of 4 to 8K area is where you're going to get some ear fatigue. Even pain, again, when there's too much of it, it can be piercing, it can be painful up here too. So a really good association here is a spitty kind of sound. When you're hearing spittiness in vocals or beatboxing, hi-hats is a good example. With a hi-hat, if you literally just beatbox and go like tss, 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 that type of sound is going to land probably around 6K usually. So let's look at this hi-hat right here as an example. There's a real recording of a hi-hat. So let's listen to that. So you can see the sound is really pronounced here around 6 to 8K, right? Right there. So let's listen. Now let's also listen to a drum machine hi-hat, right? It's right there. It's around 7K, right? So between 6 to 8K, you're getting that beatbox sound, that S sound, that T sound. Another association is like a slap of a basketball, slapping a basketball on the ground, or when you clap your hands. Or think of the crack of a snare drum. If we went back to the snare, that crack on the sound. See how that's right up here? Those are those pesky upper mids from 4 to 8K. Beautiful things can happen there, but they can also be pesky. So you got to get to know them to get your best mixes. Let's keep moving up. Now we're going to look at around 6K, so a bit of an overlap, 6K to 10K. This is where we're going to be able to add sparkle and brightness in our mix. We're going to open up the mix, give it a sense of clarity in the highs, especially for vocals, cymbals, and acoustic instruments. If you're adding in this area, it's going to bring out a lot of clarity. This area of around 6 to 10K, some associations are the detail of a voice. So not the chest resonance, the low fundamental frequencies, but the detail on top. This is going to be where a lot of the clarity in a sound comes from, other than the breathy airness on top that we'll talk about in a moment. Here's a good frequency association. This is like a buzz of a mosquito. Check this out. It's that area in there, 6K, 10K, that's where the bulk of that buzzing sound is coming from. But remember, there's still one more important frequency range after this buzziness too. But now let's go higher to 10 to 20K, but we're not done yet. I'm going to show you a trick after that you don't want to miss. So 10 to 20K, this is where we're having our air. This is where there's a sense of brightness and shine and shimmer at the top of the track. This range is less about kind of the specific instruments and in general more about the overall sparkle of a mix. So a really good association is breathiness in a vocal. If you listen to like a modern rap vocal, a lot of those vocals will have a massive high boost on the top end. So let's listen to this range and then I'll show you some examples. So right up there, it's this sparkle of the vocal, the highs of the vocal. You're hearing a bit of the cymbal, the crispiness of the cymbals. Up there in that 10 to 20K zone is where we're going to make those parts of those instruments shine. Think of the breathiness of like a pop vocal, for example. There's always that high end boosted on that vocal to make it cut through and sound really breathy. It's like a whisper of air, angel dust, or whatever you want to call it. This is that highest top sizzle of a cymbal or a vocal. In fact, let's listen to a pop vocal right now.
Falling back in line, but I don't wanna leave your love behind.
Listen to all that breathiness. This is a little too breathy for my taste in pop vocals, but this is to hit this example home for you. Listen to that.
Falling back.
We're at 10K here. Here's the difference that breathiness can make.
Falling back in line, but I don't wanna leave your love behind. Maybe I'm waiting for a sign. I see it every time.
And here's a crash cymbal so you can hear that shine on top of the cymbal. Now, one last association for this area for me is something like chimes. Chimes are very sparkly, very high. It's almost like the sound of breaking glass, right? Here are the chimes. That sparkle on top of the mix is 10, 16, all the way up to 20K and beyond. Now I'm going to give you a trick you can use to get really good at these frequencies in just your daily life. But I encourage you to also watch this video over and over if you can. Write down the frequencies, write down some associations, some ideas that also work for you that they remind you of, and you're going to get really good at this. Now here's a way that you can use these associations in your day-to-day life. As you're walking around doing your things, listen to sounds in the environment around you. Ask yourself, okay, where is that sound in this frequency range? When I hear that lawnmower in the distance, where is it? Is it honky? Is it muddy? Is it close to me and has kind of a buzz on top of it? When I hear that car going by, you know, it sounds like bass, but is it totally hitting me in the chest like a thunderstorm? No, so maybe that car in the distance has a rumble in that bass zone, but not the sub zone. When you hear that mosquito buzz by your ear, when you hear the birds in the trees, this will change the way music sounds to you forever. because you're always going to be listening to things different. What I'm sharing with you here in this video, even though some of the examples are kind of fun and funny, it's no joke. Like, this is literally how I hear these frequencies every single day as a mix engineer behind the speakers and also out in the world in my day-to-day life. Great, so you know the frequency ranges and what they sound like, but how do you actually get better sounding mixes with this information? Well, you might want to know what to boost, what to cut, and what typically sounds good. And instead of you playing that guessing game, I have made a free gift for you. It is my home mixing cheat sheet. It is a one-page guide with all sorts of EQ settings, common settings for instruments like guitar, bass, drums, vocals, keys, strings, synths, you name it. It's all on that cheat sheet, and that's going to help you dial in a great sound for your mix. It's free right now, so make sure you grab that at the link at the top of the description. And if you enjoyed this video, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So if you do want to keep developing your ear, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that I can help you do that. All right, I'll see you in the next one.